out to Cape Palmas, mountain back to Atlantic Ocean, Obomi Hills to Country, to educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah, focus on Liberia, for Liberia, Liberia, for Liberia, yeah. From Monday to Sunday, from Monday to Sunday, it's focus on Liberia. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, current affairs, reliable information, history, talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday. Focus on.
Okay. Can you hear me, John?
I can hear you, Jackie. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be back here with you all. My computer or my Wi-Fi is a little unsteady, so please bear with me and bear with my guests as we discuss issues on the Liberian Studies Association's Scholar Series. So the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Series hosts scholarly academic discussions and interviews on topics relevant to Liberia. The Liberian Studies Association is a nonprofit scholarly organization that provides a means for effective cooperation among persons interested in furthering research in all scholarly disciplines on topics relevant to Liberia. Today, we are pleased to have with us Jonathan Ort, a PhD student at the University of Chicago. Hi, John.
Hello, Jackie. I'm delighted and honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. I first met John at the 56th annual conference of the LSA, which was this past April at Morgan State. His enthusiasm for his research was contagious, and we got to talking, and I found myself eager to learn more about his work. So we invited him today to talk to us about his work. But first, let me properly introduce John to you. John is a PhD student studying Africa, Caribbean, and the Atlantic. His research interests includes anti-colonial nationalism, back to Africa thought, Black theological movements, Christian missionaries and empire, decolonization, Liberia slavery and abolition, race and religion, and U.S. imperialism. He is a member of the History Department at the University of Chicago 2024 cohort, and is it New Buyer?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yes, a New Buyer Family Distinguished Doctoral Fellow. His research focuses on how Christian discourse has shaped the modern making of race, particularly as regards Liberia. John spent 3 years at Yale Divinity School, where he received a Master of Divinity. And he said that experience informs how he seeks to consider race and religion as categories that constitute one another. His interest also stemmed from research that he conducted about the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, which has, since 1926, run the world's largest contiguous rubber plantation in Liberia. So John has written a lot about Firestone and about his research on, he holds is it AB in history?
That's right, exactly, yes.
Okay. So some of his works are When Justice Means Impunity, And he wrote that, he published that In Africa is a Country in October of 2024, and how Firestone exploited Liberia and made Princeton as we know it, which was in the Daily Princetonian in December of 2022. So, John, it's good to have you. And as I said before, we're gonna take it slow and easy. It's not meant to be so in depth, but the people in Liberia and the scholars and Liberians here would really like to know more about your work. So first, we would like to know, how did you get involved or interested in Liberia and Firestone? And for those of you who have now noticed that I've been dropping the words, John's research focuses on Firestone and its relationship with Liberia and Princeton University. So John is going to tell us a little bit about how he got interested in this topic.
Jackie, thank you so much, and much gratitude to you for that really generous introduction. And absolutely, everyone, thank you for joining today. I look forward so much to hearing from you and to being in conversation. As Jackie mentioned, I started by studying history when I was in college, and I really began that journey knowing nothing about the history of Liberia. I grew up here in the United States in a very white suburban context. I wasn't familiar with all that Liberia has been and experienced over the last 2-3 centuries, and it really was coming to college when my interest started to begin. And I was already hoping to learn more about anti-colonial struggles in the 20th century in Africa. And in some of that initial research, I had happened to read about the existence of the Firestone plantation in Liberia. I knew next to nothing, though. And then when I arrived to college, I was at Princeton University, which is located in New Jersey. And the main library on the campus there is named Firestone. And so it wasn't that hard to put 2 and 2 together and to realize that there had to be some kind of connection, right? That the Firestone name atop the library had to be connected to this massive corporate project of extracting rubber from Liberia. And so when I was 18 in that first year of college, I wrote an editorial in the student newspaper that called for the university to examine and investigate its connections to Firestone, given that Firestone has, through that plantation, exploited Liberia at this point, right, for a century. And from there, I found myself really compelled and really interested in the history of Liberia. And the more I learned, the more I felt that this is where I wanted to dedicate my attention. And ultimately, after I went through college and graduated, I had the chance to do a much more deep historical investigation into the entanglements that allowed Princeton University to profit from Firestone's exploitation of Liberia. And at the same time, as Jackie so kindly mentioned, I went to divinity school, which had me thinking a lot about the ways that Christian missionary projects have shaped Liberia's history, the ways that Liberia has so often figured as a kind of promised land, as a nation that would bring about salvation. And there's many kind of complicated directions that idea takes, and we can talk about that. Now that I'm in this PhD, I'm hoping to bring together the research I've done into Firestone, as well as thinking about race and religion together. And I'm really excited to keep learning about Liberia and to be in conversation with Liberian listeners here today and every day, I hope.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, I always think of when the formerly enslaved came to Liberia as a Christianizing and civilizing mission, as they call it, and how it started really from the church. I went to Penn Yan because I don't live far from Penn Yan. And one of the pastors from Penn Yan, from one of the churches there, was one of the very vocal advocate of the return to Africa, in that little small town. And so I always say that it's determined a Christianizing and a civilizing mission when they just wanted to get them out. But coming back to Firestone, I know people are they know Firestone, they know where it's located. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Firestone. So we know that before Firestone, there was this Back to Africa movement by Marcus Garvey, right? He wanted to take educated or skilled blacks back to Africa, and actually he chose where Firestone is around that area to take them. But unfortunately, he and Du Bois were not in good books at the time, right? And so Truman, during that time, Truman sent Du Bois to be the designate, and then everything fell apart because then we look Firestone came to Liberia. Can you just talk a little bit about how instrumental was the government of the United States in securing Firestone and for the company? What did they do with the government of Liberia? How did they go about making sure that these acreage that you have 10% of arable land in Liberia, that it was given to Firestone or contracted to Firestone?
Absolutely, yes. That's such important history for us to understand. So thanks for the question, Jackie. If we start with 1926, of course, that is the year when Firestone gains control over 1 million acres in Liberia. And as you just noted, that is roughly 10% of the arable land in Liberia, right? This area that is clearly holds the capacity to for large-scale, massive agriculture. And Firestone gained control of that massive amount of land through an agreement that was deeply unfair, an agreement that gave the Firestone Company, this American corporation, very favorable terms and allowed Firestone to control the land for generations, right? This is a contract that would extend for a century. It allowed Firestone to profit immensely and to owe very little to the Liberian government. And if we take a step back, that agreement came about after several years of this forceful coercion from the United States, as you just noted. And so Firestone, it's important to note, Firestone is both the name of the company, it's also the name of the man who founded the company, right? So we have Harvey Firestone Sr., the man who founded the company that has his name. And he was very much involved in American politics. He was very closely aligned with powerful American politicians. And Harvey Firestone had this vision of creating a global empire for his rubber business. And he was very much hoping to create and grow his own rubber trees. Rubber trees produce latex, the liquid substance that's the most important in creating natural rubber. And at that point in time, there were British and Dutch monopolies on the global production of natural rubber because the Netherlands and Great Britain had these colonial empires, and they themselves were extracting rubber from other parts, from other colonies in the world. And Harvey Firestone chose Liberia as the place where he would establish his own, virtually infinite supply of raw latex. And to bring about this plan, he enlisted the help of the American State Department. So he had American diplomats in Washington, D.C., contacting the leadership of Liberia and putting pressure on them to say, you need to accept this deal. And I think very much presenting the deal as a kind of illusion of progress for Liberia. At this point in time, Liberia faced the threat of colonial encroachment, right? This is the era in the 20s of British and French colonialism in West Africa really at its high point. And Liberia, as an independent, sovereign Black republic, faced the threat of European colonialism. And Firestone and the American government claimed that the plantation could protect Liberia from those colonial threats, because the narrative went that if Liberia accepted the plantation, then the United States would come to Liberia's protection and would make sure that Liberia never lost its land and was never invaded. That was the promise that was made. In reality, that promise really reflected a deep-seated racist paternalism that said, Liberia is something like a child to the United States, that the United States should come in and control Liberia's affairs. And so it was after several years of that kind of messaging, right, in this political maneuvering, that the deal was signed. And at that point in time, of course, the Liberian political elite, this was during the era of settler rule. So I think it's important to note that the agreement also profited those who were most in power. But at the same time, it very much left Liberia vulnerable to control and exploitation by the United States.
It was interesting reading your piece, because I started to read other papers, and it seemed as if at that time Liberia was in a hole for $5 million. So Liberia, so Marcus Garvey was saying, I can try to get this debt paid or waived, whereas at the same time the American government was saying, no, we're not going to do anything like that. We know we're going to put even more pressure for Firestone to come to Liberia. Okay, so Firestone comes to Liberia. Like they said in some of the papers I was reading, these were the time of the big three. There was Firestone, there was Thomas Edison, and there was Ford. Yeah. So the big three. So of course, Firestone now becomes almost an extension of the United States power, right? They have this hefty power behind them. And not only do they have this hefty power behind them, you have also this special relationship that they claim exists between the United States and Liberia. So all of these now galvanized into this brew that was able to formalize agreement for the Firestone plantations. So now we have Firestone, and the interesting thing is that now Firestone is not only Firestone, but then there's Harbell, right? So there's Harvey Firestone and his wife Ada Bell. They joined their names, and then there was a town called Harbell. So it's a derivative of their names. But how did they get the workers to come and work on the Firestone plantation?
Absolutely. Another critical question. And I think you're very right, Jackie, to remind us that Harvey Firestone, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, all three of these men fancied themselves as the kind of foremost exemplars of progress. They thought of themselves as brilliant inventors, as the captains of industry who would bring about a modern America. And so they really wanted to lean into a kind of heroic cult of personality. And the three of them, traveled together. And I say this in order to emphasize that for Harvey Firestone, the project in Liberia, it was about profit, but it was also about PR. It was about signifying in the United States his, what he claimed to be his benevolent intentions for Liberia. And I think your question about how Firestone procured Liberian labor is really important on this point, because Firestone proceeded in a very deliberate way, and it created a system of what I think rightly can be called plausible deniability. So Firestone, in effect, knew that the laborers who would come to tap the rubber trees and harvest the latex knew that labor would have to be compelled by violence. But Firestone ensured that it was not the company itself that was bringing laborers to the plantation. So the terms of the agreement stipulated that Firestone was entitled to tens of thousands of Liberian laborers, and it was this presumption that Firestone could have a massive labor force. And the reality, of course, is that in order to supply that kind of human labor, Firestone would need to coerce and would need to force people's labor. And so there was this agreement and this understanding with the Liberian government that chiefs who had authority under settler rule, the chiefs who were who were located, who had local authority and then were subordinated to the settler regime, that they would provide through a quota system a certain number of men, and in other cases women and children as well, from a particular town or village or local area. And the understanding was that the Liberian government would actually do the kind of violence of uprooting people, forcing them to come to the plantation, and then compelling them through the threat of force to stay. And as a matter of fact, Firestone used this strategy to its own benefit. Listeners might be familiar with the fact that the League of Nations investigated Liberia in around this time, the early 1930s, around 33, on allegations that the Liberian government was practicing slavery. And that was an allegation that carried explosive implications, because we know, of course, that Liberia is a nation founded on Black freedom, founded on the promise of abolition. So to accuse Liberia of practicing slavery was to suggest that the leadership in Monrovia had broken their fundamental promise. And as a matter of fact, that investigation was designed to let Firestone off the hook. And the investigation found, of course, that it was the chief authorities and was representatives of the Liberian government who were coercing people to work, not only on the Firestone plantation, but also on the island of Fernando Po. And again, listeners might be familiar with some of this history. At the same time, the League of Nations, which was dominated by these white European and American investigators, found that Firestone was not guilty of any kind of coercive or exploitative practices. And so, to your question, Jackie, I just to drive home this reality that it was Firestone working in collusion with the Liberian government, but in a way that always left the American corporation the most protected.
Yeah. It's funny because thinking about Fernando Po, we had discussed that, and it was interesting that they also let the Spanish government off the hook, but they did say it was the Liberian government who had practiced it. But moving on, so we're slowly coming to the crux of the matter. So Firestone is entrenched in Liberia and they're working in Liberia. How did Firestone? Because remember, viewers, we said that Jon's work is about Firestone. It's about Liberia. It's about Christianity and things. But we're trying to focus on the relationship also between Firestone and Princeton and the nexus of money. And so how did Firestone, I'm talking about the person, Firestone, become involved? Because he graduated from Columbia, right? How did he get to Princeton?
It's a good question too.
Yes.
So Harvey Firestone himself had a background in as this kind of industrialist figure. Ultimately, he himself didn't have a connection to the university, but all 5 of his sons attended Princeton University.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is how the Firestone family became entwined with Princeton University. And at this point already, right, Princeton has long been one of the oldest, most famous, wealthiest institutions of higher education in the United States. And so the Firestones really looked to Princeton as a source of prestige. And at the same time, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, Princeton understood that the Firestones had a huge amount of wealth. And throughout the 20th century, the Firestone family had this very close relationship with Princeton, where they were giving money many, many times, more than 150 times across 60 years. And so we see that the money, this Firestone family fortune, which has everything to do with the plantation in Liberia and the ways that the Firestones profited from Liberian labor, that money was making it to Princeton, which again has this kind of global reputation for being so famous and so elite. And so that's the kind of convergence that we're exploring today.
Yeah. In fact, in your paper, one of it, if I may quote, you said that 3 generations of the Firestone family, and I'm quoting, 3 generations of the Firestone family had given or pledged more than $1 of every 100 in Princeton's endowment. That's a lot of money.
It really
That's
is.
a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So and so let's talk a little bit about that. So Firestone is making money in Liberia. Firestone has a plantation in Liberia. Then they have the industries in the United States, in Ohio, I think, right? Where they are making the rubber and things that not only that people need, but that the American government also needs for defense. So they have a lot of money, right? But giving the money to Princeton, right? To the library and to other things that were happening there. So when you have the 99-year lease, you have Princeton's entanglement, as you call it, right, with them. Now, how much money? I want to go over your meticulous chart, if I can find it. But they gave a lot of money, and what you did was that you even put it in today's terms. But first, they gave in 1957. Well, they gave $250,000 for the expansion of the Firestone Memorial Library. In 1958, they gave even more money, and then the first installment of $250,000 for the new engineering building. So we're not only talking about the library,
right?
There are also other buildings.
That's exactly right. That's
okay.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. Would it be helpful to talk a little more about that?
Yeah. Walk us through the history of them giving money and where they gave the money and for what purpose, or yes, just I'll sit back and I will also learn with the viewers, and I'll give you free rein. Just walk us through, Jon.
Sure thing, Jackie. Thank you. So to do this research, I went to the archives and the documents that Princeton has about its own history. And I could find, when I was going through all of those materials, which go back to the 1920s, I could find, this documentation that showed every gift that the Firestone family was making to Princeton, as Jackie just explained. And the library is the most famous of those gifts. The library was built in the 1940s with a gift of $1 million. But at the same time, the library really is just the kind of like the crowning gift of a vast amount of money that the Firestones sent to Princeton. And there are a huge number of different purposes that the Firestones donated to fulfill. It ranges from, as you said, engineering facilities to rowing, at like the sport of people being in a boat and rowing, and the Firestone sons, when they had been students, had rowed. And so the family gave money to support student athletes using the boats to race against each other. So you see this vast range of interests that Firestone is trying to support. And the family very often gave the money to Princeton by transferring stock of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, right? So the corporation's publicly traded entity, and Princeton would receive actual shares, right? Actual equity in the company, which means that Princeton University became a shareholder in the company, and the company was therefore, right, accountable to Princeton. And I think that's a really important detail to note, because the research I did and the argument I make is that it's not just Firestone money, but in particular, it is the way that Firestone exploits Liberian labor. It is the many, many decades of racist violence and abuse that Firestone perpetrates in Liberia. Those are the forces that enrich Princeton. And so by putting together this record, as you mentioned, Jackie, we can see when we adjust for inflation, the Firestone gifts total $39 million to Princeton. We can see, as you noted, that of every $100 that Princeton owns, at a certain point, more than $1 of that was coming from Firestone. And, if we flash forward to today, Princeton is, alongside other, other very wealthy educational institutions in the United States, it just commands this incredible wealth, right? Princeton today has an endowment of, I think, some $35 billion. And that immense wealth cannot be separated from the money that Firestone was extracting from Liberia. And I make the argument that Firestone's gifts, right, whether it be the library, whether it be engineering facilities, whether it be the rowing house, every single one of those gifts turned Princeton into this world-class modern university. And I think what this history shows us is that actually it's not widely known, but the ways that an institution like Princeton, which we often think of as being progressive, we often think of Princeton as a force for good in the world, as a place where research and innovation are happening. Actually, Princeton cannot be separated from the realities of racial capitalism and American neocolonialism over Liberia. And I think it really changes how we understand an institution like Princeton when we realize that, in fact, that library and some of its most famous sites and facilities are coming from Liberia itself.
I visited Highland, the estate of James Monroe, yeah. And then I went to the University of Virginia, and they had the names of all of these these enslaved people who had helped to build the university, And I tell people a lot that a lot of people talk about the Rhodes Scholarship.
That's right.
And the Rhodes Scholarship is like one of the most, esteemed. But Cecil Rhodes, when that scholarship was formed, he said no Black should be part of it.
That's right.
And for years, there were no Blacks who could be a Rhodes Scholar, right? And even now, I think there are very few. I think it started in the early 80s before Blacks were accepted. So a lot of the eminent institutions in the world, right, are built on these labor, on this exploitation. And I want to read something from from your paper, Jon, if I may, to just let people know that why Firestone was giving money to Princeton. Yes. This was the situation on a plantation, and I'm quoting Jon's paper. He writes, the rules of Jim Crow segregation governed the plantation's hospitals, schools, and social spaces. By the late 1940s, fewer than 200 white Firestone managers oversaw more than 25,000 Liberian laborers. The company's white staff, enjoyed amenities such as a golf course, social club, a bar, anyone of African descent, including Liberian dignitaries. Not until 1958 could Liberia overcome Firestone opposition and pass legislation that outlawed segregation within its borders. Nonetheless, Firestone refused to desegregate the plantation schools. 4 years after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled school segregation unconstitutional, right? So, but the part that when you said that to combat the risk that infectious disease posed to the plantation's productivity, the Firestone Company embraced medical racism. In 1931, the year Leonard Firestone graduated from Princeton, the company administered plasmoquine, a potentially lethal anti-malarial, to more than 250 plantation residents, including children. So, in the same year, 1958, that Princeton accepted at least 13,700 from Harvey Senior Sons, white researchers infected dozens of Black staff and residents, including 2 infants, with a live strain of malaria. I read this thing and I said, I think with your degree in divinity, you were just like, how can this be? My question to you is that when these things were happening, when the money was being sent to Princeton, when some of the workers were being used as guinea pigs for medical testing, and all of these things. In your research, did you come across anything that said, oh, and the Liberian government opposed this, or they differed, or they argued that these things should not be? I just want to know if there were any kind of notations in your research that you saw that the Liberian government at the time opposed these things.
Right. And thank you for sharing that passage. I think that by and large, it's important to note that Firestone has exercised this kind of neo-colonial power, right? And it has tried to assert its authority over the Liberian government. And in terms of the era of settler rule, as we were already discussing, I think it's important to note that, generally speaking, right, Liberian presidents and legislators wanted to try to preserve Liberia's sovereignty as a republic, right, and worked to try to prevent Firestone from preventing, or they worked to try to stop Firestone from infringing on that sovereignty. And so I think the historical record does show these various instances where Liberian power brokers tried to push back against Firestone, tried to gain more favorable terms, tried to acquire a deal that would be better for Liberia. At the same time, I think it's important that we understand that the interests of Liberia's settler elite became very much entwined with the Firestone plantation. During the nearly 30 years when President William Tubman was in power, right, I think that these connections became the most apparent. And during those Tubman years, right, there is a sense in which the most powerful political figures in Liberia were themselves cultivating rubber, and therefore were helping Firestone to do whatever it is that it wished to do in its pursuit of profit. And so, for example, in the 60s, there were times when the laborers on the Firestone plantation went on strike to demand better conditions. And in fact, Liberian police and soldiers were sent to quell those strikes and to help the company maintain what really is this enclave and this system of white supremacy, of Jim Crow segregation, of medical racism. So I think that part of the story that has to be confronted is the ways that Firestone was threatening Liberia's sovereignty. And I think we can see the ways that the Liberian legislature and presidents worked to try to stop that. And at the same time, they understood that Firestone represented a very profitable opportunity for a certain small sector of the population. And so I would say that they also made their peace with the Firestone plantation. And of course, the plantation continues till today. We can also talk about what Firestone did during the Civil Wars. And there was a way in which Firestone, I think you can see this through line in its pursuit of profit, which has always come at the expense of the most vulnerable Liberians.
Yeah, because people forget that Tubman was the largest plantation owner, rubber plantation owner outside of Firestone.
That's right.
So I mean, this is a new dynamic you've introduced that I've never looked at. That Liberia was actually between a rock and a hard place. Kick Firestone out and lose the protection of America, and then your territory is chipped away by the other foreign forces like Britain and France. Keep Firestone in, and then you have to take what comes with Firestone's occupation. So at the time they were in a rock and a hard place. Okay, so I will keep coming back to your paper, and then when we're done, I'm gonna listen. But it's so interesting reading your paper, Jon. It's so richly researched, and and you have so many different angles that you present in the paper that I hope you're going to present this at the Liberian Studies Association. I hope you write a paper for the Liberian Studies Journal. I hope that, we have a lot of people listening. A lot of people have shared the broadcast. You come back and sometimes there are 500 people. You come back a week later, there's 1,000. I hope that people will listen and share the broadcast to historians and to others. But I'll come back to your paper and I'm going to quote another one and then a question after that. And I'm quoting John's paper. Princeton has long propagated the company's paternalistic narrative. Quote, it has been said it is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. End quote. President Goheen wrote to Harvey. One thing I do know, this is a quote again, that wherever the name of Firestone is heard, warmth and enlightenment are sure to abound. So the next year, the president of Princeton asked Firestone to fund a professorship in African studies, citing the company's long established and forward-looking interest in Africa. End of quote. Was that ever funded? Was it funded?
It was never funded by Firestone, but the request
Okay.
was made.
Okay, and you see this not only with the plantation. You see even a lot of NGOs. You know, when I'm talking to some of the NGOs, they're saying, "Oh, we get our money from Mobil or from Shell."
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you're doing climate change. Shell is destroying it, or whatever, that Shell, but whatever company, you know, is creating havoc. But yet you are taking the money. So it's almost like this, you know, this one hand washes the other. You know, you have Firestone giving money to Princeton to share enlightenment and education, yet at the same time not giving money to where they are making the money, you know. And then you start to think, like you say, where's the corporate social responsibility? But then again, we come back to Liberia was between the rock and the hard and the hard place. But talking about the forced labor, I found this article about they said that about they talk about Firestone, how Firestone was locked with labor dispute, and the laborers, they said the steel workers who have they decided to discuss about the forced labor of Firestone, right? And they said the union developed plans to use what it believed might have criminal in conduct by Firestone.
Mm-hmm.
And then plans were hatched to hold a press conference. A secret briefing was prepared for Vice President Al Gore. And then the union document, all of a sudden, the 43-page confidential report was never published. They found out that Firestone was having this forced labor, and these union workers decided that they were going to bring it to the public. And then all of a sudden, they said the steel workers union never made its finding public. Instead, it buried the investigation of Firestone's role. This is in the Liberian Civil War. And the company's action remains secret for more than 20 years. What happened to the investigation is not clear, but after the union completed its inquiry, Firestone and the steel workers met in confidential negotiations and reached a deal. The union won concessions on pay and benefits, and, you know, and that was it. They talked about it, and that was it. So it's you know, I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I'm just saying that it's like everybody who has a dog in this fight, once the dog is fed, they're done. You know, they step back and they say, okay, you know what? Yes, Firestone is doing forced labor and we have the findings, but we're not going to publish the findings because our negotiation demands have been met. So it's very interesting. Coming back to Firestone, and we're going to continue with Princeton, but given your degree in divinity, I would like to ask you, what role did the church play in the establishment? I would not say the establishment, but in the continuing conduct of Firestone. Was there a religious element in all of this?
I very much think so. I think that's the right question to be asking. As I thought more about it, when I first started to study Firestone, it seemed to me that the company's arrival in 1926 represented a kind of break or a new chapter in Liberia's history, in that it meant that there was this American corporation that created a mass industrial scale project of extractive racial capitalism and white supremacist racism. As I thought about it more, though, I've come to this conviction that in many ways the Firestone plantation is very much in keeping with the same evangelistic project, as you noted earlier, Jackie, right, of Christianizing and civilizing, in heavy quotes, Liberia, and in particular thinking about the ethnic linguistic nations that have long lived along the Liberian coastline, right, and trying to spread this gospel, spread this kind of colonial form of Christianity. And so we know that those motivations were at the root of the colonization movement in the 19th century, as we talked about before, right? We know that the elite white ministers and politicians who wanted to remove freed Black communities from the United States, their motivation was twofold. It was both to have a republic in the United States that was white, right, because they understood the presence of freed Black people to represent a threat to the kind of slaveocracy, the interests of American slaveholders. And at the same time, they also had these colonial ambitions that the settlers who founded Liberia would propagate Christianity and would bring about this mass conversion, would, quote unquote, redeem West Africa. So we know that those tropes and discourses come from the 1800s. With respect to Firestone, right, we know that this company is after its own profit first and foremost, but the Firestone family thought of themselves as very pious and very Christian. And in fact, right, as part of this system they designed on the plantation, they installed churches, and they very much wanted their Christian piety and this notion of charity and this, the paternalistic idea that they could lift up the people of Liberia. For Harvey Firestone and his sons, it was very much a matter of faith. And so I think in many ways, Firestone couldn't have realized that kind of project without that deeper century beforehand of history, where there are missionaries from a huge range of denominations and churches, right? Be it Episcopalian, be it Methodist, be it Baptist. We know that there are deep, complicated histories of missionaries moving between the United States, the Caribbean, West Africa, Liberia in particular, and in large part white missionaries, but also independent Black churches like the AME. And so it is to say that I think this history is really important as we try to understand Firestone, to say that actually there still is in the 20th century, in the 1900s, we still see this effort to try to bring about redemption, and this notion that American paternalism towards Liberia is willed by God and is a means of realizing the kind of divine injunction to spread Christianity. And so what I just want to say in response to your question is, the more I think about it, the more I see Firestone as being very much in continuity with the colonization movement. It's interesting to note that the American Colonization Society existed until the 1960s. It had much less power, but when Firestone came to Liberia, the ACS was very much in support. And so I think there's a direct line to be drawn between the Robert Finleys and the James Monroes and all of these Christian champions of colonization, and then Firestone 100 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for the quote that you have in your paper, and I just found it. It said, and I'm quoting John's paper. A century later, the ACS championed Firestone's arrival in Liberia, just as white proponents of colonization envisions Liberia's Black American founders subduing and edifying the nation's indigenous communities. Their successors trusted a white U.S. corporation to bring progress. Paternalistic racism underpinned Firestone's pursuit of profit in Liberia, which Harvey Sr. described as a child of the United States. The company, the industrialist biographer would boast in 1951, had brought to this backward land a modern plantation standards for thousands of natives, only a drumbeat removed from primitive existence. End of quote. And then they also said that he brought the working day to Liberia. Yeah. So that's why I was thinking that with the church bringing this civilizing and Christianizing, Firestone was just an extension of that. Okay, so we'll pause a little bit. I know I've been bombarding you with questions because I'm just so interested in this, John. Thank you so much for researching this. And George, are there calls from Liberia? I think that's how we do it. George? Um, okay. So let's read some of the comments we have here. Take my glasses off. Gabriel oh wait, show. Okay, so can you see it?
Yeah, I can.
Gabriel says, okay, given these historical facts and exploitative practices, can Liberia seek reparations or some form of financial compensation from Princeton? I knew that question was coming up. I don't know what John's gonna say, but yeah. So John, you want to take a quick try?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question, and thank you so much, Gabriel, for raising it. I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think reparations is a really important conversation that Princeton needs to have. I feel like often in the American context, right, there's a lot of conversation and discourse around the names that are on buildings and that are on institutions. And so, for example, there is an important conversation to be had about what does it mean that the Firestone name is on the library, right? And we know from the quotes that Jackie just shared that Harvey Firestone expressed these racist colonial attitudes throughout his whole life, and never had any sort of repentance from the practices that he was committing or the violence that he perpetrated. And I think the naming is one aspect of the conversation, but I think that sometimes it can be easy to forget that also we are talking about a material history. We are talking about actual sums of money that Firestone derived from Liberia and sent to Princeton. And so I very much am in agreement. I think reparations are critical to discuss. And, I also think it's really important, and this is especially critical for myself to acknowledge, it's really important that Liberian voices lead in that conversation, and that we, in the United States can listen to folks who have labored on the Firestone plantation, or maybe it's, it's people whose fathers or grandfathers, labored there, or who went to school on the plantation. I think so many Liberians have such a wide range of experiences with the Firestone plantation. And so, I very much would be in support of hoping to amplify Liberian voices when it comes to trying to demand financial redress and reparation. It's a long struggle, and in the United States, institutions almost never, willingly give up their money. And so it definitely takes, I think, and it would take years of sustained struggle, but it's very much a movement that I feel we ought to be talking about.
Okay. So let's go to some of the questions. If you have questions, substantive questions, please put them in the chat, or we will get them from Liberia. We can discuss how you get in contact with John later. Right now, let's focus on the conversation. That's what we want to focus on. So, George, do we have any question from Liberia? Is George there? I see that it's dark, but surely. Okay, so
yes, I'm in studio.
Okay, George, is there do we have questions from the audience?
No calls yet until I get announce the number first. No calls yet.
Okay, so you can please announce the number, and I think they're gonna get some data cards. You can please announce it, because I'm sure there are people who might have questions, but thank you. And then so
okay.
let's okay, thank you, George. So I will remove Gabriel's let's see if they're okay. So Asma says and Liberia schools never benefited from the rate Princeton received despite providing the labor. Yep, that's what John said. And Gabriel said that, and John said he could help to get reparations, but it's the government. It's the government that would need to initiate that. I think Patrick says they are giving a lot of money to their people and leaving nothing to the people. Okay, John, let's talk a little bit about this. I know this is a ways from your research, but look, we say morally, Firestone should be giving money to build. I mean, look at we just had Leopold Johnson from Canada who just built a reading center, right? For the longest time, we never had a reading center, no library, nothing. And you have Firestone building one of the largest university libraries in Princeton at Princeton. Now, Patrick says they're giving a lot of money to the people and leaving nothing to the people in Liberia. My question is, let's take emotionalism from the topic, from the discussion. Is Princeton, forget about being morally obligated, is Princeton contractually obligated? I don't know if you know that, if you've even seen the contract. Are they contractually obligated to give money other than the money that they give through taxes and whatever? Are they responsible to give money? Do you know that?
To give money to Liberians, you mean, or to?
Yes, for example, okay,
constituencies?
let's say they pay taxes. So we know that they pay taxes. But my question is, are they under any obligation to give? Okay, we've paid our taxes, but now we're looking at corporate social responsibility and we're going to fund a school, a large university. Are they contractually obligated to do that?
It's a good question, and I can't say that I know the answer, because I don't have access to that kind of documentation. But I would say that, in terms of doing the research, I came across various agreements that Firestone and Princeton reached together. And I think those agreements are very telling because they reveal, exactly as some of the listeners who have responded have noted, right? Those agreements reveal that Princeton was happy to work towards the benefit of the Firestone Company. And with the library in particular, the university, Princeton, and Firestone had this memorandum of understanding, had this document that said the library would teach the public about the rubber industry and would demonstrate why rubber does so much good for the world. And so if we read between the lines, we can see that actually the library is contractually obligated to do Firestone's PR work, right? It's a kind of piece of propaganda to try to claim that Firestone and the rubber industry in general do so much good globally. And I think that was a really striking finding because, again, on campus in New Jersey, it can be very easy to lose sight of the way that these gifts were done with a very particular agenda in mind. I think that, in terms of the questions that have been raised about reparations and about where money goes and the fact that Firestone has taken money from Liberia, I think there definitely is a moral conversation that needs to be had. The Firestone Company itself has long claimed that it doesn't need to pay its workers very much because it provides subsidies. It says that that the company says that it gives health care to workers, that it has schools where students can attend, and these things are true. And some listeners here might be familiar with Firestone hospitals or schools. The reality remains, however, that the company is still in control, right? And so for this has been true throughout the last 100 years, right? For laborers who are working and living on the plantation, there's nowhere to get medicine but the Firestone Hospital. And there's nowhere to access education but the Firestone School. And so there still very much is this huge imbalance in terms of power and the ways that Firestone exercises control. So I don't know if it's a matter so much of contractual obligation, but it is to say that we can look at the historical record and see very clearly that we can see very clearly that it is in fact money derived from Liberia that's at the heart of this story.
So audience, if you want to call in, Dennis has listed the number, the numbers you can call in to speak to Jon if you have questions that we have not covered. We've exhausted Jon until I think his water is done now. He's still
it's all good
about Firestone. I'm telling you, audience. And Jon is a great ambassador for the Liberian Studies Association. When he came there, I think it was his first time, and we've been saying this over and over on this show. Get involved with the Liberian Studies Association. It's an organization of scholars, practitioners, experts who sole topical focus is Liberia and issues related to Liberia. We had our 56th conference this April, and we are having the next conference April 23rd to the 25th next year at UMass Amherst. So get involved with the Liberian Studies Association, get to talk to real historians who know, I'm always learning, I'm sitting there like, oh, I didn't know this, because I'm always so excited to learn more about Liberia. So I think Asma Sondiata has so morally they are obligated to compensate somewhat the Liberian people in general for benefiting from Firestone. They can give scholarships to Liberian students from Firestone High School to attend Princeton, which I agree with. I think even more than that, one of the ways is like the medical reparations that you actually you were injecting people, I'm sure without their consent, to go and test medicine. One of the when I my daughter and I went to Liberia, we went to Chimpanzee Island, which is right behind Robertsfield. You get to Robertsfield, you pass Robertsfield, and they just have these canoes. You pay a little thing, you get in and you row. And they always said to us, oh, you cannot. They said we took a lot of food, so you were throwing the bananas to the chimpanzees. But they said to us, the chimpanzees, they are afraid of water, John. And they said, the chimpanzees can't swim. Well, when we ran out of food, those chimpanzees almost jumped into the water. We had to get out of there so quickly. But my mentioning this is because I think New York Blood Bank, they were experimenting on the chimpanzees. So when the war came and they abandoned them, the chimpanzees, of course, they are dying out, but people raise holy hell to say you are obligated to take care of these chimpanzees because they have nowhere else to go, and they need food. They can't starve to death, So talking about asthma, that they are morally obligated to compensate somewhat. Yes, but morally and not contractually is another thing. And I think that the Liberian government needs to step in and say, maybe as we need to now look at things in a different light to say, this is what we need. Times have changed. Maybe we need a university. Maybe we need something else, given the vast wealth taken from the country. But let's see if there's nobody wants to call in. So let's see. People are angry, John, with Princeton, but they haven't oh, okay, so there's one here. Let me see, what does it say? There's one says, so President Boycott visited President Trump yesterday, and he said we have minerals. Does Firestone come to mind when you hear this? Yeah, I know. I mean, rubber is it's a natural resource, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's very true that Firestone has loomed so large in Liberia's history over the last century, right? It's so much so that Liberia is sometimes referred to as the quote unquote Firestone Republic in some of these records. That being said, right, Firestone was the model for so many other concessions and multinational corporations that now work in Liberia and extract minerals, be it Lamco or other mining enterprises. We could think of ArcelorMittal or other examples. And so I think to that point, to that excellent question about what transpired yesterday, it brings to mind, yes, the possibility of Firestone in the future, but also I would say that the dynamics we're discussing and the kinds of neo-colonial control, right? I think that having this conversation today, it has a special weight to it, right? I mean, in the United States right now, under this Trump government, right, we are seeing a renewed push to try to extract and exploit. And of course, President Boakai at the White House just today and yesterday. And, I think there's so much to think about just from the past 24 hours, from Trump's, racist bewilderment about the fact that President Boakai spoke English, right, to the fact that Trump is trying to pressure Liberia to accept people without documentation who are deported from the United States, to the slashing of Liberia's healthcare budget, right? It to me very much brings to mind the fact that what we're talking about with Firestone, that's a particular history, but it reflects American neo-colonial exploitation, and it reflects these power dynamics. And here we are in 2025, and I think that Liberia is facing and navigating a similar kind of dilemma. And for me, that is really important to remember today.
I think that given that question, I think that people forget all this renewed interest in Liberia from yesterday. That sorry.
Bless you, bless you.
People still feel like there's this special relationship that's between Liberia and the United States based on the origin of the formerly enslaved people coming. So there's always, even President Boyka mentioned this special relationship. And sometimes it seems as if this special relationship make things smoother, even when it's exploitative, because if Firestone went to another country to settle, it might have been a bumpy ride, but coming to Liberia sees them as, oh, this is, an extension of the friendship. Now it may be exploitative, but this is the extension of the friendship that they hold for us. So okay, so now let's talk a little bit about your current research. I know you're going to go to Liberia soon.
Yes.
I think I'm going to be there. I'm going to look for you. We have to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have to talk about that. We'll talk about that after the show. If you stay on for like a few minutes, we'll talk about that. But tell us a little bit of when you went before and why you're going now.
Absolutely. Yes, I've had the chance to travel to Liberia once. It was almost 2 years ago, and I'm really excited to be returning soon in a couple of weeks, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The first trip I went to, it was after I had published the research about Firestone, Liberia, and Princeton, and I went in order to understand more and to hear from a wide range of interlocutors, a wide range of people with different relationships to Firestone about what the plantation means today. And so I was in Monrovia for about 2 weeks, and I got to have all sorts of conversations with people who were generous enough to talk with me. And I also made it to Harbel, and I had the chance to speak with a couple men who had tapped rubber for Firestone. And this was some decades ago, and who are now struggling to make ends meet because Firestone has slashed their pensions. Several years ago, there was a law that allowed Firestone and other companies to have more leeway in not paying pensions for retired workers. And so this was in Dolostown that I spoke with a few men who were really facing a lot of financial hardship from Firestone not paying. And I also spoke with the leadership of FAWUL, the Firestone Agricultural Workers Union of Liberia. And so it was really, it was such an honor and a privilege to learn from these folks about their perspectives on Firestone. And I had then, I wrote a piece recently that was also thinking about the effort to establish a war crimes tribunal in Liberia and, Firestone's own role in the Civil War. So that's one topic I've been thinking about more recently. Of course, now I'm here doing this history PhD, and I think I'm very much motivated to try to understand Firestone within the broader sweep of Liberia's history, as we were talking about. And so this past year, I've been doing some research and writing some papers, or at least drafts, at least. We'll see. Hopefully they get published one day. But trying to understand competing narratives about Liberia and the ways that, on the one hand, the colonization movement understood Liberia to be this kind of salvific instrument that would, as we talked about before, in this paternalistic, racist fashion, bring Christianity, save the United States from its quote-unquote race problem, right, by making America white. And that's one dimension of Liberia's history. And at the same time, I've been very interested in the kind of prophetic significance that Liberia holds. We talked earlier a little bit about Marcus Garvey, right? For example, the role or the mantle that Liberia holds in Garveyite discourse. And of course, Garvey came to be disappointed in Liberia and the grand aspirations he had for establishing, a kind of a Pan-Africanist state, and his consideration of Liberia for that role didn't come to fruition. At the same time, it very much seems to me that Liberia still holds for Garvey, right? A kind of eschatological, like in this Christian theological term, right? It has this importance, and it's perceived to represent the power of bringing about a new world. And so I'm really curious about how different historical actors have understood Liberia's mantle, right? Because whether it's the proponents of colonization, whether it's the enslavers who wanted to essentially deport formerly enslaved people from the United States, whether it's the Pan-Africanist vision of Marcus Garvey, these are radically different, antithetical traditions, and yet they converge upon Liberia. And so I'm interested in what that means and how to understand and account for Liberia's meaning, in a kind of religious register and in a global way, because I think we can also say, Liberia represents and has represented across the Liberian diaspora the promise of freedom as well as the contradictions of settler rule. And it's those complexities that I hope to explore.
That is fascinating, John, because I always I minored in history when I was at the University of Liberia, and sometimes when I'm listening to people, I start to think that if they only knew the history of how Liberia came to be, I remember learning about Elijah Johnson, right? When there was this impending doom coming on Liberia, and the British ships were passing, and they said to him, "Oh, we can help Liberia. All you need is for us to just plant the British flag." And there's this piece in Liberian history where Elijah Johnson says, "We do not want your flag here. It will cost us more than to take it down than to put it up." So when I hear some people say, "Oh, let a country just come and take over Liberia," I'm like, do you know how hard and how bitterly people fought for this piece of land that we have now? And I always think of that, because even in Azikiwe's book, Liberia in World Politics, you see that this little country played a pivotal role, in voting in the United Nations in 1945, there's so many things like that Europe is a part of, so I think that these competing narratives, and even it is important for you to explore that, because there are people who really, young Liberians, they're actually searching for, the meaning. What does it mean when you say I'm a Liberian, And I always say to people, there must be a wealth of pride behind that, Liberian tag that says to you, so many great powers tried to take this country during the way back. And these people fought every step of the way. They fought, and so we're still standing, and we hope not to go anywhere. But okay, so let's see some of the questions. Oh, John, they're already at okay. So I'm interested in the U.S. got rid of pension and created 401k and 401(3)(b). Why companies in Liberia had leeway to slash pension? John, were you welcome on the Firestone plantation? Let me ask you that.
Yeah, a good question to consider. Everyone I met on the Firestone plantation, in terms of the people who had worked there, and Faul was very receptive to me. We were able to enter the plantation. I didn't have any audience with representatives of Firestone, and on the whole, the Firestone company is known for being very guarded and very resistant against any researchers. They have art. Firestone has its own company archives in Ohio, in the U.S., and they've just completely closed them down, and they don't allow anyone to get access. And they certainly wouldn't be a fan of me for reasons that are self-evident. But I do think the plantation, right, in terms of its proximity to not only Monrovia, but in that coastal corridor and the airport, it is a place that people transit through, I came to appreciate, right, as well as still live either on the plantation itself or just nearby. And so I was grateful to go there twice. I didn't spend a ton of time, but those visits it very much felt like a important to see for myself and to try to speak with the folks I got to meet.
So still, George, do we have questions or no?
Okay,
Everybody's
so let me just announce a number so the post I call you. If you are listening to the program, focus on Liberia on Care Radio 95.9. The numbers to call 0777 959 959 0881 871 670 0777 959 959 and 0881 871 670. You can continue from your end. Once call come in, I will let you guys know.
Okay, we'll be wrapping up soon because you guys have been very gracious to give us 2 hours, but we kept saying it's a Liberian Studies Association Scholar Hour, and we've gone. But if you have questions, please do put your questions in the chat,
Okay,
or you can call.
let me just read it. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, good evening, my brother. Your name and where you calling from?
Yes, sir. My name is Roland Kamara. I contributed from Clarendon tonight.
Roland Kamara, calling from Clarendon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very kindly. So I think the program is a very brilliant program. For me, I think it's an eye-opener for some of the things I heard tonight. Even though I've been reading Liberian history, but I mean, pretty much the first time to learn about most of the things I've learned today from our panelists and even the moderators. So I think it's a very good program and they should be encouraged. Let's hope that this program will be played on other radio stations as well, so that Liberians will get to understand and know the true history of this country, especially the workings of Firestone in Liberia. But just one quick question I just wanted to know. I mean, given all that we've listened to, I mean, would be right thing for us to now begin to hold Firestone to account? Say, for example, to pay back to Liberia for much of the money that's taken from this country, because I look into the return just giving historical accounts of how much money that the Firestone goes out of Liberia and all of that. But yet, if you Firestone, I mean, the place is the way it is, like no development, nothing, I mean, in terms of corporate social responsibility, we don't see that much. In terms of improving the livelihoods of the people, also nothing. We don't have a university in Nigeria that is good at Firestone. I mean, what tangible action do you think we as a country could now begin to take in order to put Firestone to the fire? So that we begin to also contribute towards improving.
George, you got to fix your line. We can't hear him.
I'm listening, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So the question, the question is, I think it's the same question that Gabriel Carter asked. What can we do to hold Firestone accountable? So I'll leave it with John. Your question is directed to you, so I'll let you answer the question.
Absolutely, and I really do appreciate that question around tangible action, thinking about what Liberians can do. I would say, Jackie, I really appreciated what you said about the struggle to establish, and the struggle to safeguard Liberia across generations until today. And I'm reminded of the this past year's national oration delivered on July the 26th by Robtel Nije Paley, right, who's a Liberian political scientist. And in her speech this past year, I think she spoke really powerfully about what it means to be Liberian and to come together. And of course, I want to be clear too. I don't want to claim to speak for Liberia, but I just thinking about her remarks. She commented on the so-called special relationship between the United States and Liberia, which Jackie had just mentioned, and we know, as we've been talking about, right, that quote unquote special relationship more often than not has been fiction rather than fact, and we can point to these ways that the rhetoric that we hear from the United States about Liberia, right, it's always big and mighty, and it always is professes to be so noble, but I think we know the realities of how how the United States, how Washington D.C. has has so often betrayed Monrovia. And so in Dr. Paley, in this speech she gave last year, I think was urging everyone listening to turn away from that kind of model of the special relationship, and instead to think about a trajectory that Liberians can define and chart on their own terms. And for me, her speech just brings to mind, of course, my research is about Firestone. I'm very interested in the entwined histories between the United States and Liberia. And at the same time, Liberia is so much more than American foreign policy. It's so much more than just a history of neo-colonial corporate extraction. It's so much more than the history of any one corporation. And I'm reminded, and I'm interested in how Liberia, is really at the heart. If we want to talk about Pan-Africanism or different imaginations of Black liberation or decolonization in the 20th century, I think Liberia has such a central role to play precisely because of the complexities and the contradictions, precisely because settler rule in so many ways came to enact the same kinds of violence and the same kinds of oppression that had defined the United States. And so it is for these complexities, I feel, that Liberia has so much to share with the world, and again, particularly at this moment when in the United States, I feel that there's so much we could take for granted for a long time. But given this, the authoritarian turn of recent months, I think there's so much that I feel I have to learn. I feel that Americans have to learn from Liberia. And so I think in response to that question, I would just say that, Liberia has never been just an extension of the United States. It has never been merely an American story. It's a global story. It's a diasporic story. And I think that's really, really striking. And I see we have a listener from Harbel, which I'm so glad you're here with us today. And I'm grateful to everyone who's joined to hear these words.
Thank you so much. George, do we have any other? No.
No course yet.
Okay. So when you get back to Liberia and you have discussed with the groups that you have discussed before, or that you want to continue your research, are there anything new that you're going to look for? So you've looked at the.
Let me check. So you there? We have another caller on this now. Good evening.
Okay.
Good evening.
Huh?
Yes, good evening, call up. Your name and where you calling from?
Hello?
Yes, good evening. Your name and where you calling from?
Yes, all those things people are saying,
Your name.
we can't blame anyone. We should blame our senator and representative then from the 1940, 1930, the people that came, as the sister was saying about the British man, Juliet Ashmore then when they came, they put out their flag, American throw them. They think American want us to be poor today, and if we continue with America, Liberia will never prosper. Those people are wicked, and our representatives and senators are wicked. They can sign a Booker agreement every day and night for their package. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for calling. The numbers to call 0777-959-959, 0881-871-670, and 0777-959-959, 0881-871-670. The numbers to call and be a part on the show this evening.
Okay, so John.
Yeah, I'm happy to say something in response, unless you want to say anything, Jackie.
No. I'll let you speak first.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that comment as well about the responsibility of political leaders, of senators, of representatives. I think that the story of Firestone in Liberia, in many ways, I think forces us to confront the realities of settler rule, right? Because when we talk about forced labor on the Firestone plantation, it's really important to remember that actually the plantation is built upon Bassa land,
guys,
right?
Let me just Let me just hold you there a little bit. We'll have another
Yeah,
caller.
totally.
Oh, John, you're popular today. Another question.
Nice.
Yep. Good evening.
Am I on air?
Yes, you are on air. Good evening, my brother. Your name and where you calling from? We can hear you, my brother. Good evening. It's gonna be that he's not getting us there. The numbers to call 07779599959 and 0881-871-670. The numbers to call and be a part on the show this evening. You can continue.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to say, when we think about the Liberian communities that faced oppression under settler rule, right? I think the Firestone plantation forces us to think about both American neocolonialism, but also to think about the complicity and the oppression that was inherent to settler rule and the ways that a very small political elite profited from this arrangement with Firestone. And we can think about the fact that Liberia itself, under settler rule, right, there was a whole regime of forcing labor from all of the ethnic nations and groups that had called the land home for so long, right? And so whether it be the Bassa communities that were forced off the land so that Firestone could raise the forest and put in rubber trees, whether it be the men from any number of different communities and nations and their families who were forced to relocate to the plantation. I think that the caller I really appreciate, because I think we have to understand that Firestone reflects both an attempt to control Liberia, but also reflects the kinds of internal politics of oppression that dominated that era. And when we flash forward to today, we can think about, for example, the fact that Firestone during the civil wars failed to protect its Liberian laborers. The company actually, in order to keep taking rubber and profiting, it paid tax revenue to Charles Taylor, right? It very much legitimated the NPFL and these other groups, right, that were committing atrocities. And in fact, Firestone during the civil wars in the 90s, right, evacuated its white staff, its American staff, but left hundreds of Liberian laborers to face really horrific violence. And so, when we think today, right, about the struggle to establish a war crimes tribunal for Liberia, I think a similar question comes into focus for us, right, which is that, understanding the responsibility and the complicity of powerful people in Liberia, as well as powerful people in the United States, in the way that they have pursued their interests at the expense of the vast majority of Liberians. And so for me, that's where that question takes me.
So back to while we're waiting, back to to your research. So you're going there now.
Yes.
So you've discussed Princeton. You focus on Princeton and
I'm
the
back
funds that you got.
again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good evening.
Yes, I say I'm back again. They speaking the American men who back in Firestone, that everyone can make, people can make money. They are the corrupt people. Firestone can drive. They keep money for the family, and they care for the native people. They care for, or they make it as in the single. And we care.
Oh.
That's sort of lie you put it together there. So thank you.
You continue.
Yeah. Okay. So John, my question was, so now you focus on Firestone and Princeton. So you're going back to Liberia. So are you now focusing on labor practices specifically?
It's a great question, Jackie. That's still an interest. I mean, I think I'm also interested in digging deeper into missionary histories and understanding. This goes back to the 1800s, right? These movements of different missionaries and different evangelists, and between United States, Caribbean, Liberia, as we were talking about before. I should also say I'm excited to do some language study. I really don't. I'm looking forward to hopefully learning how to speak and understand Kolokwa. And at the same time, also I'm interested in the history of Vai as a language, which has a really distinct history, because the Vai script comes about in the 1800s. through a different missionary figure who was of indigenous descent from the United States and who created this Vi alphabet off of the Cherokee language. And so that's another interest of mine.
But John, when you were at the conference, you met Charles Riley, right?
Yes, I did. Exactly.
Yeah, and Charles Riley has an app now. He studies languages at Princeton, right? Princeton or Yale?
I think, is he at Yale? I think he's at Yale.
Yale. And now he has an app. He's been on Focus on Liberia, but Charles has an app that you say something, it puts it in a Vi language. It is amazing to see.
And I know he's
get in contact with Charles. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think he's also working on creating Wikipedia pages in Vi, right? Which is really cool.
Yes. People are doing really phenomenal work on Liberia. So you will go to Liberia and study all of these things and colloquial. And don't forget, Charles, John, at the reception, I was telling you about the Liberian music. Remember, I was telling you, hold it tight.
That's right. That's right.
And all of those songs I was singing, yes. So you have a lot, we'll give you a list before you go. Yes. So we're going to, I'm going to put you in contact with Megan. Megan's there. I think Kweku is there also, and so we're going to discuss. So if I don't know if people have more questions to ask. We've kept John way past an hour and a half.
No, it's a pleasure. If anyone who's listening has any ideas about, music I should learn, what I should study, I would welcome that too. I have so much to learn from everyone.
Yeah, and then we're going to ask John's permission to post something later. So we always do that. We don't just post things. We ask people's permission before we do that. But I started to read when I was interviewing, when I read The Empire of Rubber, was when I started being like, whoa. And then your paper took it in a whole, you just brought the flesh out. And I was like, wow, so that was really something good to see. So anybody else with questions? And Dennis, do you have questions? George, how about you, George? Do you have a question for John?
Nope.
He says nope. Dennis?
We appreciate you, George and Dennis. We thank you for making this run. And you're right, Jackie. I should say, I think Greg Mittman's work is so important, and I have learned so much from his book. So it's good to name drop that. And I was going to say too, I myself can reflect on how wonderful the Liberian Studies Association is. I felt so welcomed when I came to Morgan State this spring. I met Jackie and so many other phenomenal scholars and activists and people who are working in so many different realms, and it really is a family. And so for anyone listening who might be interested in getting involved with the LSA, I suggest it so much. It's a wonderful community and a really special place to come together and to think hard and critically about any number of questions regarding Liberia.
I met you too, John, at the LSA.
Let me just wait there.
Yes,
absolutely.
Good evening.
Okay.
Yes, good evening. Call up. Your name, where you calling from? Oh, you drop the line.
The next Liberian Studies Association conference will be April 23rd to the 25th at UMass Amherst in Massachusetts. So make sure you're there. Meet fascinating people who are working on Liberia. You meet historians, sociologists, psychologists, economists, And if you are a scholar associated with the LSA and you would like to come on the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Hour, which is now 2 hours, please feel free. I know like somebody wrote that there's a demand for this. People really, really want to understand history. I think somebody wrote and said, oh, they didn't know. This is not the literary hour. Professor Nangba and I did the literary hour, but this is the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Series or Scholar Hour. So we wish you safe travels, John, when you go. Don't enjoy yourself too much that you forget the research that you do.
That's right. That's right. I know I can certainly appreciate some club beer and some good times.
Yes, and we hope that the Firestone people allow you to go on their plantation. I mean, even the name plantation, Firestone plantation. You know, I tell people when they say, "Oh, Liberia was never colonized," I said it's called the American Colonization Society. You know, that's what it's called. You know, and the late Kashoni, who was a staunch member of the Liberian Studies Association, he wrote a book, Black Colonialism.
Yeah.
And that book is really, really good in understanding that there are people who are doing phenomenal work in on Liberian studies. And we encourage the public to join. So George, I think is late. I think the people don't want to call in. We have, I guess, 14 minutes to bid farewell to people. Is it there are new comments? So let's see the new comments. What's the new comments? Is the LSA on social media? Yes, it is on social media. You know, I tell people, I said, if you just Google the LSA, you will find it. You know, I mean, I don't know how John found it, but John came, you know, and people always say, oh, you know, we don't know how to get in contact. Just do a search, you know, do a search. And I think I can put the website and you can look at it. In fact, you know, we even have past videos because we also had the COVID. When we had COVID, we had 3 days of LSA, and we discussed, and you know, people couldn't go out, so the place was packed. We have Alexander, who comes every year from Russia. Alexander has a letter that the Liberian president wrote the president of Russia way back in the, I think, 1920s. Alexander, you know, he's doing a lot of work on that. And Alexander comes every year from Russia, you know, and we have Dr. Kashoni, who used to come from Israel. A lot of people coming from Canada, from Britain, you know, a lot of people. Lee Gardner, who I think she did Sovereignty Without Power. I think that's the book. She will be here soon to discuss her book, you know. So there's a lot. And then Titi says, what? There's an LSA website I just posted. Titi says, she says, we are an actual colony for about 40 years. Only 40. So so like you see, you keep talking about competing narratives, John.
Yeah.
And you can see the division even among the people. There are competing narratives that we have about the formation of Liberia, about the going ons that happened to create this nation we call Liberia. So history is a very rich area. Yeah. So if there are no more, we would ask you to close by giving us some words of wisdom, and then words of wisdom to anybody who's doing real research on Liberia. And then I'll close it up, and then Dennis will bid us farewell.
Wonderful. No, you're so right, Jackie. I think that notion of the competing narratives is very helpful to me, and to know that there is, I think for me, studying history is so powerful because there never is a final word or the final word, right? There is always more that we can critically assess. And I think what I appreciate so much about history as a discipline is that it allows us to take nothing for granted. We don't have to accept any aspect of the way things are right now as a given, right? We don't have to say, oh, things have always been this way, therefore they must continue. History allows us to say that actually any kind of social relation, any kind of order, any kind of oppression has a particular history. And I think when we trace that history, we understand what it means to try to dismantle oppression, what it means to reimagine, what it means to, you know, how to be together as a community or a nation, and how to be present for each other and live together. And so for me, I think history often requires that we examine a lot of themes that have real heaviness, particularly with our conversation today when we think about the legacies of global colonial projects, slavery and its afterlives, racial capitalism, and the violence that really has impelled the history of Firestone in Liberia. And I think it's really important that we not flinch away from that history, and also that we understand, as we talked about, the realities of a settler rule, that we understand, as you were saying, the colonial nature of the settler regime in Liberia, that we understand the realities that have always characterized the American policy towards Liberia. But I think we do this work, or at least I hope to do this work, because I hope that it allows us to think more expansively about how to move forward. And I see this question that just came through: how can we improve the living conditions of people at Firestone? You know, I think to know what has been, and to tell it honestly, and to tell it without fear or favor, I think that is the first step in order to imagine what could be different, and what might it mean for for a Liberia where all of its people are granted equal protection, and everyone's labor is dignified and is compensated fairly. And so I think this conversation, for me, I'm so grateful that you've had me, and so grateful for everyone who's engaged, because I think that we're having these conversations in order to understand and imagine what a different future might look like. And I think that to be in Liberia, to know Liberia, and to experience its incredible and unique history is so important, because I think that there is so much that we all have to learn from what we have talked about today.
I want to say thank you, John. I know I pestered you every second. I was like, John, can you come
Not at
on?
all. I kept you waiting. I should not have done that, but I'm delighted that we've made it happen.
No. We're so happy. You know, I said to Dennis, whatever time John wants, now we have to get John. And I know it's the summer. I know that you all are very busy, and you're getting ready to go to Liberia, but I can't thank you enough for making time. You know, as somebody wrote, this is what we need. We need to discuss more with authority about our country, not just opinions, but real grounded research on things. And that paper you wrote, I mean, every place I clicked, there was a source. There was a source, and when they, oh my Lord, you know, how long did it take you to do this? You know, but we want to say thank you so much to you. Thank you for coming to the LSA conference. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you for studying this. I know that you will definitely make Liberia proud, make us all proud with your work, and people will learn more about Firestone and what Firestone has done to Liberia. And as you say, this foundation of violence that enabled this capitalism to not only grow, but for funds to be exported to another country where there's enlightenment coming from education, but the people who are working are poor, you know. So I want to say thank you so much. And oh wait, there's another comment, John. I think this year, okay, he said this year brings an end to that infamous 99-year contract that Firestone signed, but then they extended it to 2041. Oh, so you see, John, I wish we had listened to you earlier, so we can say, okay, this contract, we need to add some things there that we need to have, you know. So I hope that, like the caller said, I hope that people in power are listening to you, so that even if they don't have the gumption to say, okay, we're going to try to get reparations, that they can at least say to Firestone, we know what you did, and this is what we need now for nation building, and that Firestone responds in kind and help to build the country, this nation building that's taking place. We can't thank you enough. We ask God to give you safe travels to Liberia, and we're going to get all of our people lined up to welcome you and to keep you safe, and to also take you out so you can have some good Liberian food.
Absolutely.
Yes, and want to say thank you to George for staying on. We know it's very late in Liberia, but he's here, so we want to say thank you. We want to say thank you to the callers. Thank you to Dennis, who has been patient with me. I would be like, yeah, John's coming on. No, you have to wait. No, John's coming on. Thank you so much, Dennis, for making it possible for us to have this time slot where people in Liberia can also listen to John's research and to learn something from it. So I know that, and I've been rusty, but I'm gonna try. Dennis, are you here? I'm gonna try and go back. I know they say we always close with a song, and the song says we are all Liberians. I don't know if it's still here. Dennis, is it here?
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.